This is going to be a major sections walkthrough. It's not going to be a deep dive into anything. I just want to give an overview of all the sections. So, starting off with the change log, keep an eye on this whenever you get an update. This will tell you what updated. Hopefully, it'll be coming less and less frequently as the product matures, and it seems to be getting that way. This export settings is important when you start getting strategies that you want to keep. The reason being is Nexus, this thing here has well over 300 settings in it, and you clearly cannot remember them all. Unless you made like one setting and clearly remember it, and you've only done one strategy, fine. But once you start getting the numbers out, it starts to be difficult, whether it's in numbers of strategies or number of settings that are changed from the default. So this allows you to export your settings and put them in a spreadsheet. And that's a whole section on itself. I'm going to do a user guide on this. Actually tells you how to do it, but I'm going to do a video as well. So the only thing under the user section is your time zone. It's probably a good idea to change that to your time zone. I guess you now know that I'm in the Phoenix, Arizona time zone. Should I be changing that to keep myself incognito? Who knows? Who cares? I don't. The next major section, which is the first section you will touch every single time, is the external signals, because Nexus does not trade by itself. It's designed specifically to get signals externally, as you will see in the Getting Started guide. These two were set up in this one to get both long and short signals. If you only wanted to see how it performed by going long, then you can just turn off the shorts. It'll take a few moments and it'll update. Your numbers here will change in just a second. It is quite intense. It does take a moment, but there you see they've updated. Looks to me like the short signals were making more money than the long signals. It's interesting. I should look into that near future. So there's a lot of things you can do here. These are your entries. You can set up exits. You can stop entries and exits. Like you can have an extra signal that says, well, if I get a signal here and I get an entry signal, just stop that entry or stop that exit. So this is kind of like a reverse of your entries, your exits, or an override. And this is how you set up an initial stop. And anyone who knows how to calculate risk knows that you need a stop versus your entry point to calculate risk. This is what these two are for. If you want to use the external inputs for your initial stop, there's also your risk calculation. You check these. Or you could just use it for risk calculation and not actually check them for your stops. I don't know why you would do that, but the flexibility is there because then your risk would mismatch um, uh, your exit signals. So it'd be kind of crazy to do that. In fact, I'm wondering even why I leave those options in there to be separated, but it has purpose. Otherwise, I wouldn't have done it. So the next section is your manual signals. You can do one manual trade amongst the auto trading where you can literally set up your direction of your trade, the entry and exit time and stuff. And you may want to do that if you want to use some internal thing to monitor when to exit a trade, but you manually want to enter the trade. That's probably the only use for this. And you can set up your stop loss and take profit and so forth. Um, or you can use it just to test some ideas, right? So use it as you will. It's probably one of the least used sections, but it does have its occasional use. This is clearly, as it said, the trade section is clearly all the details of your trade. So 50 in general assets, I think in Forex is the largest available in the US for your leverage. So that's why it's defaulted to that. We have a dynamic spread calculation. And if you turn that on, it will add spread to your profit or take away from your profit by adding spread. On Forex, you'll barely notice it because spreads on Forex are pretty tiny, but you will see a little bit of a drop in profit. So it's turned off by default, which kind of makes it a little bit more like trading view. You may want to turn that on automatically just before you do anything because, spreads are part of trading. You want to keep those in your calculations. Just quickly going down. I'm not going to explain all of these, but I think a lot of this, we all know what slippage is and so forth. So you can add that stuff in there as you so choose. It's generally a good idea to keep the time frame very, very low for your spread estimate, because spread is not determined by time frame. All right, it's determined by market makers. And so using a very low time frame gives you your best chance of getting a fairly accurate estimation. We can't actually get a spread. Um, in theory, if you get to a higher um, level of subscription, you could use the tick. But Nexus, and I should mention this, Nexus is designed to work from the premium up. So if you got below premium, you're not going to be able to use Nexus, just so you know. But it's not a high cost. The next one up is a high cost. It's like over $200 a month or something, if from memory. But yeah, all of this, I would say just leave it as is. Click on use spread if you want and go for it. Use your orders. You can choose your market, limit and stop. And you can set up a couple of basic rules on your limit orders. So, close rule here. I would suggest just leave it at this. It shouldn't really change anything, no matter which one you select. But by entry ID just allows it just telling it internally to track the entry and the exit IDs and match them up. And that's the best way. This other option is if we build Nexus out to something more complex, then this may be another way to go. But for now, just leave it. Don't even touch this. Maximum order look back. You can ignore that. It's not really going to affect you at all. So just ignore it. And limit orders, all your basic stuff for limit orders. So you can choose how long the limit order is valid for until it just says, no, I'm dropping it. It's in bars, obviously. You can have a little bit of a place from the current price to set it. So you can do some automatic settings here, or you could, have an external signal to set your limit order price. I believe. I have to look into that, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. But if not, maybe that's something we need to add in. It wouldn't be difficult. So I'll do a deeper dive on this later, but the idea is, yes, you can do limit orders basically. Um, Here's all your risk calculations here. So these are your normal risks, which means, almost everybody goes on a percentage of equity. And so this works on percentage of equity. If you want to be ultra conservative, you can do it on account balance, which, because we're only having one open trade at a time, account balance and equity are almost identical, so it doesn't really matter. Initial capital, of course, would be your super conservative one, because even if you're making tons of money, um, your betting isn't going to increase because it's going to be based off percentage of your initial capital, whatever that was. Starts off at 10,000 by default. Oh, I should mention, I'm going to go back to this. Nah, I'll do that later. I'll do that in a deep dive. Um, the methodologies you have here, as you can see, you can have a fixed amount. So you can just say, hey, I want to make $500 a shot. So you can do something like that. I don't know anyone who wants to do that, but so percentage is what most people do. However, I recommend that once you've got something working on percentage, that you try dynamic betting, dynamic position sizing. So I think of it as betting, right? And that is supposed to, although sometimes it goes differently to, and we're about to see, I don't know what it's going to do. It might crash the numbers. Well, it didn't. It did what it's supposed to do. So have a look at these numbers now, right? 42 there, 64 there. TradingView is suggesting you're going to make more money than Nexus is. Nexus, I find, is a little more accurate than TradingView. Sometimes you will see these match exactly, depending on your methodology for your entries and your exits. And I can explain that in detail if someone needs to know. But Nexus only uses the TradingView strategy tester as an output, as a visual output. It doesn't use it for any calculations at all, because that's how I can do spreads and things accurately, which TradingView can't do very well. So keep that in mind, that this is an output. This we consider the arbiter of truth, not this. This is just something else, another way of looking at the same thing, because they can create nice, pretty graphs, and we can't do that. I'll put it back to percentage just for people to you know, see what's going on. If you want more detail, you can turn these on, and these will give you details on the entries and the exits, and a nice label will come up showing you stuff. I'll let you look at that in your own time. These are ways to, oh, I gotta listen. These are ways to um, mitigate the dynamic bedding, and you can play with these and see these things can like slow down the dynamic bedding, make it a little bit smoother, which might help with marginal wins. Marginal wins is probably what's the word for it. Strategies that are kind of on the edge of winning or losing. This might be a way of just smoothing it out a little bit. So you can play with these. I generally find they're not needed, but you can definitely use them. Here's all your broker fees. I think it's pretty obvious what these are. I'm not going to go through these. Is there anything here? Um, if this is actually needed, like if you're so non-profitable, if you're down on the bottom edge of the smallest position size you can take, which means this would actually get enacted, you should probably either fix, make better, or drop your strategy because, this is kind of like bare minimum. What do we do if we have almost nothing left type criteria? I would not bother with it. Almost all brokers do margin on equity, so I would never touch this if I was you. Just leave it as is. Here you can limit your risk through a couple of methods. I think it's pretty much obvious what these are for. It does say pre-leverage, and that means these numbers may be slightly different than how you might think of them in terms of 1%, 2% betting. So you might be allow these to be a little bit bigger because we do some very sophisticated internal risk calculations when we do the dynamic betting. And in theory, you should never get a margin call unless you really racket those numbers in weird ways. This is pretty obvious, just how much you were willing to bet. And the test window. This is incredibly useful. As you can see here, okay, if we put on use this, what it will do is we've automatically divided the timeline, whatever the total timeline trading will give you. In this case, it's 20,000 bars into 5 buckets. And you can just turn on one of these buckets. It's just divided the timeline up into 5 equal sections and see if all the different sections are profitable or not. Or you can say, turn on, say, the last two, for example, and say, I'm just going to develop my strategy with those two. And that way you could come back and turn on the first two and turn those two off and see if it's still showing profitability when you switch buckets. That's a really good way of avoiding curve fitting. So it's a tool. It's a tool for curve fitting avoidance. So keep this in mind. This is a little bit different. You could do the same thing you did here, but manually it would be, it'd be a pain in the ass to calculate when the time should start stop. The main use for this is to set your start time from today, now, whatever the day is when you want to start, and say, this is when I want to start trading, and which means all these numbers will go to zero because you won't get any trades if you set it to today, because theoretically you would have done no trades yet. And then you just leave it alone, you don't touch it, and you watch the trades start coming up. That's your forward testing. You don't have to record anything in a spreadsheet, any of that rubbish. You just watch the numbers start racking up or down, hopefully not, as it trades. And there's your forward testing. So that's what I use it for. I'm sure other people use it for other things, but I find that it's most useful. Usually what I'll do is if I am forward testing something, I'll go up here, I'll make a copy of this, and I'll say make copy. And I'll forget about this thing on the end. This is useless. I'll get rid of that. And in the front of this, I'll put FT like that. And in fact, I'll just save that. And then I'll start my forward testing from this point. The reason I put the FT in the front, by the way, is because this is tiny and you can't just hover over there and see, what the full name is. So if you've got a long name, your FT will disappear off the end and you won't even notice. You may not even notice you're changing one that's meant to be fixed and unchanged. So keep that in mind. that there is, if you want to use that forward testing methodology I was talking about, that's the way to do it. Going down to the next major section, which I'll pull up the settings again. Going down, 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 down. Okay, so you get past that, test window. Okay, we're on the entries. Very little to do in entries, right? I mean, basically you just get some external signals. It has no internal way of generating entries. Well, actually, there is a developer section at the very bottom, but nobody should be using that. I guess you could, in theory, and I might even touch on it when I get to the end of this video, but in general, I couldn't imagine anyone caring or wanting to use that. So you can turn it on. That'll just give you an extra signal showing your entries. But given that all these level lines start at your entry and you get the trading view thing there, do you really need it? Probably not. This might be useful for you. This allows you to set when you are going to start and stop time frames for when you can take trades. And you can do it down to every day of the week, or you can just use this one, which will affect all days and not use the ones below. So you can affect entries internally with this just to restrict them. Maybe you want to pick, I don't know, something like ICT kill zones or something. So that's where that could be useful. Exits is a lot more complicated because there's lots of ways of getting out of a trade. So here you can see, you can turn on your details and give you all sorts of stats on your exits. You can set up an ATR, and by default, this is turned on. So it's set up with a 3 times your ATR of a 14 period, and it's using that to set your risk point. So, and as you can see, it says using this one for risk calculations. So if you got an initial stop set, you should probably always have the risk calculations as well. There is an occasion to have no initial stop. You still need a risk calculation somewhere. So this, you might see this unchecked and this checked. If you're trying to run essentially a stopless or initial stopless strategy, and you have some other mechanism to exit, then you still need this if you want it to automatically calculate the risk for you. And without the risk calculation, this is not a strategy, it's an indicator. So you do need a risk calculation somewhere. Take profit, again, you can turn this off and have no take profit points. This is an interesting thing. I'll go into this detail later, but you can use the take profit as a minimum point. So instead of exiting there, it'll just use that as a minimum. And then if the trade keeps going up, you can have something else that like a trailing stop. In fact, this use stretch down here in connection with this would do it. And depending on the strategy, it can increase your profit or it can completely crash and burn your strategy. It just depends on whether your strategy revolves around making small moves or big moves, essentially. And there's lots of controls over this. So as you can see, in this case, it went down a little bit. But you see, you got another line here. You now got a dashed line next to your take profit line. And you can see that went up a little bit over the take profit. So what's going on here is we don't want the second we get above the take profit to try and not to exit as soon as it hits it, because then what happens is just noise is going to stop you out there anyway. So what we do is we say, if we've got this use minimum actuated, we go up to this line before we use take profit as a minimum point. And then once it's hit this line, only if it then comes down and hits this line here. Whoops, I didn't mean to do that. Hit this line here, do we exit? So that's your buffer so that you can have a little bit of an up and down and maybe still get, a nice trade. Here you can see it went up, hit here, and then came down and hit here. So we got an exit there. And here you can see where Trading View and my system behave a little differently. Trading View is saying we exited here. My system is saying we exit here. And this is why you get slightly different numbers between mine and Trading View. When I use Trading View as an output instead of an arbiter of truth, it gets limited in how it can exit. So sometimes it doesn't exit at the point when I say so, basically, is what's happening. So it's just a limitation in how I can use it. But I can't get the fancy stuff that I want if I use it as the sole sayer of a trade. So we're not going that way. Okay, moving on. I'm going to turn this, I'll put this back to the way it was. Um, these are some other things, that little thing between the dotted line and straight line. These are just different ways of controlling that gap, and you can choose how you want to do it, right? Um, I'll talk about these when we get down to the section, the safe and stretch section, but they're exactly what you just saw. They're methods of a trailing stop. So the use stretch happens after you take profit, and use safe happens up to the take profit if you choose to use them. Moving on, what have we got here? So this is your last bit of the exit section, and it's pretty much identical to the entry in that it just gives you time frames to exit. Or actually, it's slightly different. It's almost the reverse. This is telling you when you must exit, whereas the other one is saying, here's the window where you can enter. So it's pretty much the complement reverse. These are all those lines you saw, these green, orange, and mauve lines here. Here they are. So you can turn them off if you want. Obviously, you can always go to styles and turn things on and off, but I've got some controls on the front as well. And I should have done that because now I lost my spot. Okay, so getting back down to where we were. The PL graph. Now, this one's kind of interesting. These are profit and loss graphs. I should actually type profit and loss there. Certainly, I have enough space for it. I might do that. But if we open this Nexus portion up here, so I allow that to be a little bit wider, right? And make sure we're at the end here. So I'm going to go all the way to the end. Make sure we can see stuff. Where is it? There it is. Okay, so as you can see, we got the end of the trading here, or end of the timeline. And I'm going to let that go, open that up so that I can put this up and not cover. This is a little trick. And by the way, you can grab that and not lose your settings, and you can grab that and not lose your settings. Those are the two things you can grab. If anyone finds something else you can grab and not use your settings, not lose your settings, let me know. Okay. Going back down. Sorry, not close your settings panel, I should say. You're not actually losing settings. Okay. So here it says show TV strategy tester, show in. So if I uncheck this here will disappear. I guess I won't wait for it. You don't need to wait to see that happen. But there's a couple of other ways we can visualize our trades. We can do this and this. Actually, I'll just do the top one first. These tend to clash a little bit visually, so let's just see one at a time. So I'll wait for this one to come up. Yeah, and just as proof of putting while I'm doing the other two, I might as well turn that off. So again, takes a moment because it's doing lots and lots of thinking. And in just a second now, here you go. So this is showing your profit curve, which is pretty much the same thing the TradingView strategy tester done, just a different way. So that's your zero line, red if it's below zero, green if it's above zero, and you can get a nice clean little picture of your profit. You can adjust that a little bit. You can see you can have like a fixed width, or you can have a compressed. Compressed means that it's basically 1 pixel across per trade, whereas fixed width is it'll just use a certain number of pixels. So I said use 200 pixels and use 200 pixels. So that's 1 pixel per trade. That's what you're seeing there. And as you can see, the strategy tester is turned off. Turn that on, so that. And now I'll show it the real time profit and loss looks like. I am going to change this wording from PL to P, either P/L or profit and loss. I'll decide that sometime in the near future. Okay, so what this real-time trading is showing you is it's actually showing you bar by bar when your profit and loss change. So each time a trade closes, like here, you're going to get a small little bump, right? That's basically your real-time trading. So really not much more to say about that. Although, why am I seeing that it looks like it's moving a little bit? It must be adjusting a little bit as the trade is progressing. So it's only going to be flat in the middle here, right? In between trades. And then while you're trading, you're still going to get a little up and down because, as your profit goes up and down, it's showing equity, not final close positions only, it's showing equity as you're trading. Man, how many times am I going to keep knocking this thing off and putting it back? Okay, show it again. Going down to the next section. So what are we seeing? Trade lines? Nope. This is where we were. So I think I've pretty much shown you enough that you can turn these on and see all sorts of details. Um, these will bring labels up on your entries and exits. So I think it's primarily your exits. And you can see more detail about the trade, how the position sizing were, how many things you bought, and all the rest of it. All that's in there. And trade lines. Your trade lines are these things. These green lines, or red, depending as the case may be, are trade lines. Now, as you can see, you can color it not only by whether it's profit or loss, but if we're winning or losing. So this will go red if it's short and green if it's long. So now you see it's now red because it's a short. This will go green if it's profit and red if it's a loss. It defaults to this one. You can also, let's see, where is it? Add labels. If you really don't want to think about it, you rather read it rather than look at the colors, you can turn this on and it will tell you both in the middle of the line. So I'll just give that a second to come up. So you can see it's a short and it's in profit. Or it could have been, so yeah. So that's, I'll leave those on. I kind of like them. The trading table is this. So this is whole thing here. You want this. This is basically telling you everything about your trade. And I will go through this table in a separate video. I mean, obviously there's a lot of pieces in there. I think most of it you can figure out for yourself, but I will do a video just on this table at some point. So I'm not going to go through it. The betting table, some people might get a bit offended by calling trading betting, but I run out of words sometimes, so not to be ambiguous about some word having several meanings. I think betting is very distinctive for your risking, for your risk calculations. And it just brings a table up, it puts it over here. All the tables you can move around within the constraints of what TradingView will do. And all of them you can control text size, again, within TradingView's constraints. So yeah, so you can bring a table up and see those calculations. You can get those in other ways as well, but this is probably a good place for it. And now we're down to the two internal things, the safe and stretch. I won't go into great detail, but just consider them a fairly sophisticated way of creating a trailing stop. Right? Use an ATR mixed with lookbacks in certain ways and stuff, and you can control all of those lookbacks and stuff in here. Here you got controls over the ATR and the high low it's coming off of, and how far you look back on the highs and lows, and the ATR, how far it looks back, and all the rest of it. And so you can control the mechanism here. And then here you control the rules of how to use it. So you have rules for exit and you have rules for stopping an entry from occurring. And the one that's on by default is whenever the price hits the trailing stop, exit. That's the only rule that's on by default. And you got to go way up the top there where you saw in the exit section to use safe and stretch to actually turn on completely. But here you control the rules in this section. And stretch and safe are pretty much identical. In fact, they are identical. There might be one extra rule in one of them, just because of a slight difference being above and below the take profit. But even that, I think, isn't true anymore. Yeah, I think they're identical. So the only difference between safe and stretch is one is for after you pass take profit, and one is to use up to take profit, and you can choose to use one or both of them. I generally find, by the way, the point going up to take profit, just having a fixed take profit point, I find more profitable than any trailing stop type methodology. But once you get to take profit, depending on the strategy, you can make lots more money by having that trailing stop, just going beyond that take profit point. But it is very strategy dependent. Sometimes it can just nuke your results as well. So you just got to try it and see, or just have a bit of an idea based on how your strategy is meant to work on whether you should try and use it or not. The alerts, this allows you to show here how to trade, and I will do a whole thing on how to use um, uh, the output. But just to show you the alerts, it's got show in table, but it's also got, whoa, why am I not seeing something there? Not sure what I did there. I've been updating this, so maybe something changed a little bit. I'll have to have a look at that. Oh, hang on. Let me check something. There you go. It's right there. It was covered up. So I'm gonna make this small. Don't need that at the moment. So as you can see, that's pretty tiny writing in there, and you don't have to leave it that small. It is individually controllable from the rest of the table. So if we go right back down to the alerts section, you can see that that might be a little hard to read, so we'll just make it a little bit bigger. And that's everything you need to know to make a trade. And while you're trading, if you've got a moving stop, you'll see the details come up here, or if you've got to close the trade, the details will come here. That way you can have the open information separate, and then the other things that are happening to the trade kind of come and go as they come and go, but you can have this just sitting here looking at it. You can remove this. If you don't want all this space here, you can just click on that, and then it will only show up at the point during the trade. Um, and so it pretty much tells you right there what it does. So I'll just let that go away, and then I'll click back since I already clicked it. And oh, caught up. Oh, we must be in the middle of a trade. Yeah, this thing's almost continuously trading. So I bet we're in the middle of a trade. That's why it's still there. You can take it off completely by checking that. And it'll always show you the trading, the manual format for trading, so you can manually take a trade. However, we do have other things of trading when you want to automate. These are almost complete. They're at the testing phase right now, and when the testing is finished, we'll announce them as, hey, these are usable. Um, but that's not far away. Probably even be ready before I finish all these videos. That's about it. These are the licensings if you've got a Pine connector or using Pick My Trade, one of these two connectors. This is specifically for Pick My Trade, and it's got to do with some of their internals where I actually disagree with them on some stuff. So I'm going to leave the option to do things either how they say it or how I think things should happen. Debug, I'm not going to go over this, probably not even in a video. It's just, if something's going on weird. And development, the same thing. This was primarily here for me when I was getting this whole thing going. But just so you know, you can use it to generate entries and exits. And here you can say, I want an entry and exit, long, short. And you can use that just to see how something goes with random signals, right? You can just literally put random signals into it, or maybe random entry signals and then test exit signals. So it could have its uses. And these are things you can suppress from the other inputs. Like, so if you want to only development signals, you by default suppress all other signals from other sources. But you can turn it off and say, I just want to use this for entries and I want to use my external sources for exits. So you can mix and match. And that's a thing TradingView puts on the end. Nothing to do with me. So there you go. That's all the sections going from top to bottom. I hope that's good enough for you to get a general idea. And the details of these is coming in another video. And I'll probably do one video. I might do one video per major section. That's probably how I'll do it. We'll see. The alternative is just to have timestamps. Anyway, I hope that was useful for everyone. Catch you later.